No man dared step into the blizzard, until one broken cowboy walked into hell. To save them, the small mountain town had always lived with winter. But this year, winter felt different. The cold did not just sit on the ground. It moved through the air like something alive, creeping into every street, every home, and every quiet thought. Snow covered the rooftops so deeply that doors opened only halfway. The wind never seemed to rest. It howled day and night, brushing against windows like cold fingers that would not let go. People stayed inside more than usual. The small cafe closed early. The store owner swept snow from the steps again and again, only to watch it return within minutes. The radio in the town hall played soft music between weather warnings. Each warning sounded more serious than the last. At the edge of town, past a narrow dirt road and a line of tall pine trees, stood a small wooden cabin. It leaned slightly to one side, as if it had grown tired of standing straight. Smoke rose from its chimney in a thin gray line that often disappeared into the white sky. Inside that cabin lived a man who had once been known by everyone. Years ago, he had been the one people called when a horse went missing, when a river flooded, or when a trail became too dangerous to cross. He had been strong, fast, and fearless. He rode with his back straight and his eyes always on the horizon. Children followed him through town, pretending to ride invisible horses behind him. Now, he walked with a slow step. His right leg did not move the way it used to. On cold days, it ached so badly that he had to stop and rest after only a few steps. The town still remembered him, but mostly in quiet thoughts. People would say his name softly, then look away, not wanting to remind him of what he had lost. Inside the cabin, the man sat by a small fire. The flames were low, but they gave enough light to fill the room with a warm glow. His coat hung on a nail near the door. His boots rested by the wall, still covered in dry mud from months ago. An old radio sat on a wooden shelf, its antenna bent slightly to one side. He held a cup of warm water in his hands, letting the heat sink into his fingers. Outside, the wind hit the cabin hard, making the walls creak. He had learned to listen to those sounds like a language. Breaths. A sharp hit meant strong wind. A soft whistle meant falling snow. The radio suddenly came to life with a burst of sound. He did not reach for it at first. He had grown used to hearing weather reports and warnings, but this voice was different. It was not calm. It was tight and rushed. A bus had gone missing on the mountain road. The man lifted his head. The voice on the radio explained that a school bus carrying children and 2 adults had failed to arrive in the next town. The road it traveled was narrow and curved along a steep edge of the mountain. In good weather, it was already hard to pass. In a storm like this, it could become a trap. Rescue teams had tried to go out. They had turned back. The wind was too strong. The snow was too deep. The voice on the radio asked if anyone in town knew the old trails or the back paths that ran along the mountain. The man reached out and turned the radio off. The cabin fell into silence again. Except for the fire and the wind, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He could see the mountain in his mind. He knew every bend, every narrow ledge, every hidden path. He had walked and ridden those trails for most of his life. He had helped others cross them when they were afraid or lost. But that was before. He opened his eyes and looked at his leg. It was stretched out in front of him, stiff and slow to move. He tapped his foot against the floor. The movement was small and uneven. He told himself he was not the same man anymore. In town, the news spread quickly. Lights turned on in houses up and down the streets. People stepped outside, pulling coats around themselves, calling to neighbors. The town hall opened its doors, and families gathered inside. Some held each other and stared at the floor. Others stood near the radio, waiting for more news. A few men tried to prepare trucks, but the engines would not start in the cold. Others tried to walk out of town toward the mountain, but the wind pushed them back like a wall. Fear filled the room, but no one said the word out loud.
"Back in the cabin!" The man stood up slowly.
His leg protested, sending a sharp pain through his body. He gripped the edge of the table until the feeling passed. He walked to the small window and looked out at the white world. The snow was falling thick and fast. The pine trees bent under its weight. The path that led from his cabin to town was already half covered again, even though he had cleared it that morning. He remembered a day from long ago. A young boy had fallen into a river during spring melt. The water was fast and cold. No one else had stepped forward. The man had jumped in without thinking. He had pulled the boy out, shaking and wet, but alive. Bose. Later, someone had asked him why he did it. He had answered simply, "Because I was there." Now he was here again. He walked back to the chair and sat down, staring at the floor. His hands rested on his knees. He could feel the steady beat of his heart. He told himself that others would find the bus,
that rescue teams would get through once the storm slowed. But the storm did not sound like it was slowing.
The radio remained quiet. No new updates came. Time passed in slow, heavy moments. The fire burned lower. The light in the room grew dimmer. Outside, the sky darkened into a deep gray, then almost black. The man stood up again. This time, he did not sit back down. He moved toward the coat on the wall and took it down. It was thick and worn, with a tear on one sleeve that he had never fixed. He put it on and pulled it tight around his body. He slipped his boots onto his feet, tying the laces slowly. Carefully, he picked up a small bag from under the table. He opened it and checked what was inside. A rope, coiled neatly. A lantern with fresh fuel. A few pieces of dry food. A small metal cup. He paused at the door. His hand rested on the handle, but he did not turn it yet. He walked to the back of the cabin where his old horse stood in a small covered space. The horse lifted its head when it saw him. Its eyes were calm and steady, the way they had always been. The man reached out and touched the horse's neck. The animal's warm breath rose into the cold air. "I can't take you," he said softly, even though no one else was there to hear. The path ahead was too narrow, too dangerous for riding in a storm like this. He knew that. He rested his forehead against the horse for a moment, then stepped away. Back at the door, he took a deep breath and opened it. The wind hit him hard, almost knocking him back. Snow rushed into the cabin in a wild swirl. The cold air filled his lungs like ice. Bah. He stepped outside. The door closed behind him with a soft final sound. The world in front of him was nothing but moving white and dark shadows. The path he knew so well was already hard to see. He lifted the lantern and held it up. The small circle of light cut through the storm, but only a few steps ahead. He took his first step forward, then another. Each step was slow and careful. This leg dragged slightly behind him, but he kept going. The wind pushed against his chest, his back, his sides. It felt like walking through deep water. Behind him, the cabin faded into the white. Ahead of him, the mountain waited. He did not feel brave. He did not feel strong. He felt cold, tired, and unsure. but he kept walking anyway. The wind did not ease as the man moved farther from his cabin. Instead, it seemed to grow louder, as if the mountain itself was speaking. A lantern in his hand shook, and the light danced across the snow in uneven lines. Every few steps, he had to stop and plant his boots firmly, waiting for a strong gust to pass. The path he followed was one he had walked many times in the past. In summer, it was a narrow dirt trail lined with tall grass and small wildflowers. In winter, it became a thin, hidden line between deep snowbanks. Now, even that line was hard to see. Grasp. He used the shape of the land to guide him, feeling the slope under his feet and the way the wind hit his body. He knew that when the wind came from the right side, he was still on the trail. When it came from the front, he had drifted too far left. His leg burned with every step. The cold made it stiff, and the weight of the snow pulled it down. He leaned on the lantern at times, using it like a walking stick. His breath came out in short, sharp clouds that vanished almost as soon as they formed. In town, the hall was still full of people. The radio sat on a table in the center of the room. Everyone listened to it, even when it said nothing. A mother sat near the wall holding a small scarf in her hands. She twisted it again and again, her eyes fixed on the floor. A man stood by the door, looking outside through the frosted glass, hoping to see headlights or movement in the snow. No one knew that the man from the cabin had already stepped into the storm. On the mountain, the trail began to climb. The snow grew deeper, reaching up to the man's knees. He lifted each leg slowly, carefully, making sure his foot found solid ground before putting his weight down. More than once his boots slipped, and he had to drop to one knee to keep from falling. He stopped beside a tall pine tree, using it as a shield from the wind. He rested his back against the rough bark and closed his eyes for a moment. The tree did not move. It stood strong and quiet, even as the storm rushed around it. He opened his eyes and looked up at its dark branches heavy with snow.
"You've been through worse than this," he whispered, though he was not sure if he meant the tree or himself. He pushed away and kept moving.
The world felt smaller as he went on. The light from the lantern showed only what was directly in front of him. Everything else was hidden. It was like walking through a tunnel made of snow and wind. A sound reached his ears, faint at first. It was not the wind. It was deeper and steady. He stopped and listened. The sound came again, a low, distant rumble. He knew that sound. It was the river, far below the trail. The trail curved near a steep drop where the river cut through the mountain. In the past, he had always been careful there. Even in good weather, he moved slower now, testing each step before trusting it. The snow hid the edge of the path, and one wrong move could send him sliding down into the dark below. He held the lantern out to the side, trying to see the shape of the land. The light showed a small rise on one side and a sudden dip on the other. He stayed close to the rise. His thoughts drifted as he walked. He remembered riding along this same trail years ago, his horse's hooves steady and sure. The air had been warm then. The sky had been wide and blue. He had laughed, feeling strong and free. Now he could not even feel his fingers inside his gloves. The wind grew sharper, cutting through the seams of his coat. He pulled it tighter around himself, but the cold still found its way in. His shoulders hunched and his head lowered, as if that could make him smaller and less of a target for the storm. Ahead, the trail flattened for a short stretch. He recognized the shape of a large rock that rose from the ground like a frozen wave. He walked toward it and touched its rough surface, glad to feel something solid and real. He took the rope from his bag and tied one end around the rock. He wrapped the other end around his waist. If he slipped, the rope might give him a chance to stop himself before going too far. With the rope in place, he moved forward again. The storm seemed to pause for just a moment. The wind dropped and the snow fell more gently. In that quiet space, he heard something else. A sound that did not belong to the mountain. It was soft, high, weak. He froze. He turned his head slowly, trying to find where it was coming from. The sound came again. It was a voice, carried on the thin air, almost lost in the storm. "Hello?" The word was barely there, but it was enough. His heart jumped, and a sudden rush of warmth spread through his chest, even as the cold still held his body. He lifted the lantern high and moved toward the sound, calling back, "I'm here!" He followed the voice down a gentle slope, then around a bend in the trail. The snow was thinner here, packed down by something heavy that had passed through. His boots left deeper prints in this area, and he knew he was close. The shadow appeared first, a dark shape against the white world. As he moved closer, the shape became clear. It was the bus, tilted slightly to one side, its back wheels sunk deep into the snow. The windows were covered in frost, and the front end pointed toward the empty space beyond the trail. He hurried forward as fast as his leg would allow. He reached the side of the bus and knocked on the metal with his gloved hand. The sound echoed inside. A face appeared behind one of the windows, then another. Eyes wide, hands pressed against the glass. The man felt a tight knot in his chest loosen. He moved to the door and tried the handle. It was frozen in place. He braced himself and pulled harder. The door creaked, then opened just enough for him to slip inside. The air in the bus was cold, but it was calmer than outside. People sat close together, wrapped in coats and thin blankets. Some were very quiet. Others whispered to each other when they saw him. He stood there for a moment, catching his breath, snow melting off his coat and boots. "You're not alone anymore," he said gently. The words felt simple, but they carried more weight than anything else he could have said. Outside, the storm continued to move across the mountain. Inside the bus, a small space of hope had formed. But the man stepped fully inside the bus and closed the door as much as he could behind him. The wind still found small gaps to push through, but the noise softened. Narration. The world outside became a distant roar instead of a wild shout. People looked at him like he had walked in from a dream. Some did not speak at all. Others whispered his presence to the person next to them, as if saying it too loudly might make him disappear. He took off one glove and raised his hand slightly, not in a big wave, just enough to show he was real. "My name doesn't matter," he said softly, breaths. "What matters is that I found you." A small child near the front seat leaned forward, eyes wide. "Are we going home?" the child asked. The man paused. He did not want to make a promise he could not keep. He knelt down so he was at the child's level. "We're going to stay safe," he said. "And help is coming. I made sure they can find us." The child nodded, holding on to those words like something solid. The man looked around the bus. There were more people than he expected. Some were sitting on the floor between the seats. Others were pressed close together to share warmth. A woman held a thermos with both hands, as if it were a treasure. A young man wrapped his jacket around someone else's shoulders instead of his own. The air smelled of cold cloth and quiet fear. He set his bag down in the aisle and opened it. He pulled out the food he had brought and passed it around. It was not much, but it was something. He showed them how to take small bites, how to save it for later. poured a little warm water into the metal cup and let people take turns sipping from it. As they ate and drank, their shoulders lowered just a little. Their breathing slowed. He moved to the back of the bus and checked the windows and walls. The wind pushed snow against the sides, but the bus held. He tapped the metal floor with his boot. It felt solid enough, but he knew the ground under them could still shift if the storm grew worse. He took out the rope again and tied it around a strong metal bar inside the bus. He fed the rope through the door crack and tied the other end to a tree outside, the same tree he had used to steady himself earlier. He pulled the rope tight. "If the bus tries to move," he said to the two adults sitting near the door, "this will help hold it in place." They nodded, watching his hands with careful eyes. Time moved strangely inside the bus. Minutes felt like hours. The storm outside did not change, but the snow kept falling. The wind kept pushing. The man walked up and down the aisle, checking on everyone. He spoke quietly to those who were shaking. He sat next to those who stared at nothing. He told simple stories about the mountain in summer, about how the river shined in the sun and how birds built nests in the trees along the trail. He did not talk about himself. He did not talk about his leg or his past. He talked about warm things and bright days. At one point, the lantern flickered. He noticed right away. He reached down and adjusted the fuel. The light steadied, but he knew it would not last forever. He pulled out the small flare he had saved and set it near the door, just in case. A loud sound hit the side of the bus. Breath. Everyone jumped. A wave of snow slid down from the roof and piled against the windows. The man stood up straight. "It's all right," he said, though his heart beat faster. Just the snow shifting. He moved to the door and looked outside through the small gap. The world was still white and wild, but he could see the tree holding the rope. It stood firm. He took a deep breath and stepped back inside. A woman near the front seat spoke for the first time. Her voice was thin but clear. "Why did you come out here alone?" she asked. The man thought for a moment. "Because I knew the way," he said. "And because I couldn't stay behind." She nodded, as if that answer was enough. Narration. The hours passed slowly. Some people dozed, their heads resting on shoulders or seat backs. Others stayed awake, watching the lantern's light move as the man walked. His leg ached more with each step. He felt the cold deep in his bones. He sat down for a moment near the middle of the bus and closed his eyes. He remembered the accident that had changed everything. The fall. The long days of pain. The way people had slowly stopped calling his name when trouble came. He had told himself that his time as a helper was over. But here he was, in the middle of a storm, surrounded by people who needed him. He opened his eyes and stood up again. The flare was still near the door, but he picked it up and looked at it. The red top felt cold in his hand. "It's time," he said quietly to himself. He wrapped his coat tighter, opened the door, and stepped back into the storm. The wind hit him like a wall. The cold rushed in around him. Pulled tight as he moved away from the bus. He raised the flare high and struck it. A bright red light burst into the white night. The color cut through the storm, strong and clear. The light reflected off the snow, turning the world around him into a field of red shadows. Inside the bus, people pressed their faces to the windows. The children pointed. The adults held their breath. The man held the flare as high as he could, his arms shaking. The wind tried to push it down, but he held on. He stayed there until the flare burned low, until his fingers felt like they might not move anymore. Benny went back inside the bus, closing the door behind him. The red light faded, but its mark remained in the dark sky. He leaned against a seat, breathing hard. Someone handed him the thermos, and he took a small sip. The warmth spread through his chest. Outside, far away, something changed. The storm still howled, but beneath it, a new sound began to rise. A deep, steady hum. The man lifted his head. Engines. They were still distant, but they were real. He looked around at the people in the bus. Their eyes were wide again, but this time the fear in them had shifted. It had turned into something else. Hope. "They're coming," he said. No one cheered. No one shouted. They just held each other and listened as the sound grew slowly, steadily closer. And for the first time since the storm had begun, the mountain did not feel so alone. The sound of the engines did not rush toward them. It moved slowly, like a promise that needed time to keep. The man stood still in the aisle, listening carefully. The storm still pushed hard against the bus, but now there was something else in the air, something steady and strong. People inside the bus leaned forward, as if their bodies could help pull the sound closer. The man raised his hand gently. "Race. Let's stay calm," he said. "They have to move slow in this weather." The children nodded. The adults took deep breaths. Everyone tried to hold on to the quiet hope that had filled the small space. He walked back to the door and looked outside again. The red mark from the flare was gone, but the snow around the bus glowed faintly under the lantern light. He could not see the rescue teams yet, but the sound of the engines came again, clearer this time. He tied the rope tighter around his waist and checked the knot on the metal bar inside the bus. If the wind pushed harder, he wanted everything to hold. A sudden, strong gust hit the side of the bus. The whole vehicle shook. A few people gasped. A child grabbed the seat in front of them. The man stepped forward. "It's all right," he said firmly. "We're steady." He placed his hand on the wall of the bus, feeling the cold metal under his glove. It felt solid. He pressed his shoulder against it, not because he thought he could hold the bus in place, but because he wanted the people to see him standing there, facing the storm instead of turning away from it. Minutes passed. The engine sound grew louder, then softer, then louder again. The rescue teams were moving around bends in the mountain, climbing slowly, carefully, fighting the same wind and snow that had tried to stop him. The man's leg throbbed. He shifted his weight, but he did not sit down. He stayed on his feet, watching the door, listening to the mountain. Inside the bus, a woman began to hum quietly. It was a soft, simple tune, something slow and gentle. The sound spread through the bus like warmth. A child joined in, then another. Soon, the quiet hum filled the space, pushing back the howling wind outside. The man felt something tighten in his chest. Peak. He just listened. He just listened. A light appeared in the distance. At first, it was so faint that he thought it might be his eyes playing tricks on him. Then it appeared again, a small moving glow through the white storm. He opened the door a little wider and stepped halfway outside. Bird. The rope pulled at his waist, holding him steady. Raised the lantern high and waved it slowly from side to side. The distant light paused. Then it moved toward him. "They see us!" he said, his voice breaking just a little. Inside the bus, people stood up, holding on to seat backs and each other. Some laughed quietly.
Others wiped their eyes. The rescue team's vehicle came into view, its headlights cutting through the snow like two bright stars.
It moved carefully, tires gripping the hidden road. Another set of lights followed behind it. The man stepped fully outside, standing between the bus and the oncoming team. The wind pushed against him, but he did not step back. The first vehicle stopped a short distance away. Two figures climbed out, bundled in heavy coats, their faces covered, except for their eyes. "Are you all right?" one of them called out. The man nodded. They're inside, cold but safe. The rescue workers moved quickly. One went to the bus door while the other spoke into a radio, giving clear, calm updates. The man untied the rope from around his waist and stepped aside, letting them take over. The door to the bus opened fully now. Warm air from inside mixed with the cold night. One by one, people were guided out, wrapped in thick blankets, and led toward the rescue vehicles. Some walked on their own. Others needed help. The children were carried, their faces buried in warm coats. As they passed the man, many reached out. A hand touched his arm. A child hugged his leg. A woman whispered, "Thank you," over and over. St. He did not know what to say. He just nodded. When the last person stepped out, the bus stood empty, quiet and still. The rescue team leader walked up to the man. "You came out here alone?" they asked, disbelief in their voice. The man shrugged slightly. "I knew the way." The leader shook their heads slowly. "That took courage." The man looked back at the bus, now just a dark shape in the snow. "It took needing," he said. The team guided him toward one of the vehicles. The warmth inside wrapped around him like a blanket. His body, finally free from the cold, began to shake, not from fear, but from the release of holding himself together for so long. They drove slowly down the mountain, back toward the town. The storm still raged, but the road behind them was now marked by tracks and light. The path was no longer hidden. When they reached the town, people were waiting. The hall doors were open. Light spilled out into the snowy street. Faces appeared in the windows. As the vehicles stopped, the town moved forward as one. Families found each other. Children ran into waiting arms. Tears and laughter mixed in the cold air. The man stepped out last. For a moment, no one noticed him. All eyes were on the people who had been lost and were now found. Then someone saw him.
Bah. He glances around in despair. He glances around in despair. He glances around in despair. He glances around in despair.
People turned. The man stood there, his coat still dusted with snow, his boots wet and worn. He did not look like a hero. He looked tired. He looked like someone who had walked a long way in the cold. The town leader stepped forward. "You brought them back," they said. The man shook his head. "They held on. I just helped them wait." The town leader placed a warm blanket around his shoulders. Someone handed him a cup of hot drink. The warmth burned his hands, but he welcomed it. The crowd did not cheer. They did something quieter. "That's banal." They stood close. The wind moved through the streets, but it did not feel as sharp anymore. The storm was still there, but it no longer felt like it owned the night. The man looked around at the faces in front of him. Especies that had once looked at him with quiet sadness now looked at him with something else. Respect. He felt his leg ache. The long night was catching up to him. The town leader guided him toward the hall.
Come inside, they said. You've done enough for one night.
He allowed himself to be led. As he stepped through the door, the warmth and light wrapped around him. The noise of the storm faded into the background. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know if his leg would ever stop hurting, or if his life would return to what it once was.
But he knew one thing. When the mountain had called for help, he had answered.
Morning came slowly to the small mountain town.
The storm did not leave all at once.
It softened, step by step, like a tired guest that had finally decided to go. The wind became a whisper instead of a shout. The snow fell in light flakes instead of heavy waves. The sky, which had been dark and heavy for so long, began to show pale blue behind the clouds. Inside the town hall, people slept in chairs, on benches and along the walls. Blankets were spread across the floor. The smell of warm drinks and simple food filled the air. Every now and then, someone would wake up and look around, making sure it was all real.
The bus was found. The people were safe.
The night was over. The man sat in a quiet corner near the window. A blanket rested over his shoulders. His boots were off, placed neatly by the wall. His leg was stretched out in front of him, stiff and sore. He held a cup in both hands, letting the warmth travel into his fingers and arms. Right. Outside the window, the street was covered in fresh snow, smooth and clean, like the storm had tried to erase everything that came before it. The town leader walked over and sat beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They both watched the morning light touch the tops of the buildings and the tall pine trees beyond. "You should rest at the clinic," the town leader said gently. "They can check your leg." The man shook his head. Brave.
"I'll be all right," he said. "It's not new."
The leader studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Still," they said, "we're glad you're here." The door to the hall opened, and a small group of children came inside with an adult. They had been taken home earlier to rest, but now they were back, bundled in coats and hats. They looked around the room, searching. One of them saw the man and stopped. "That's him," the child said quietly. The others followed the pointing finger. They walked over together, slow and unsure, like they were approaching something important.
One child held a folded piece of paper in their hands.
The man noticed them and sat up a little straighter. The child stepped forward and held out the paper. "We made this," they said. He took it carefully and opened it. Brace. Inside was a drawing of a mountain, a bus, and a small figure holding a light in the snow. Above it, written in uneven letters, were the words, "Thank you for finding us." The man swallowed. He nodded once.
"It's beautiful," he said.
The children smiled wide and proud. They did not stay long.
They waved and went back to their families, leaving the man with the paper resting in his hands, like something fragile and rare. Later that day, the town gathered in the open space near the hall. The sky was clearer now, and the sun reflected off the snow, making everything bright. People stood in small groups, talking in soft voices. The storm was already becoming a story, something to remember instead of something to fear. The man stood near the edge of the crowd, not wanting to be the center of anything. He watched as families laughed together, as children ran and slid across the snow, as neighbors helped each other clear paths and doorways. The town leader stepped up onto a small set of steps and raised a hand. The crowd grew quiet. "We don't usually make speeches," they said.
We're a small town. We talk to each other, not at each other.
But last night, something happened that we need to say out loud.
They looked at the man.
When the storm came, we were all afraid. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to reach the people who were lost. And then, one person decided not to stay warm and safe. One person decided to walk into the cold and the dark. The crowd turned to look at him. The man shifted his weight, uncomfortable. The leader continued. We don't call him a hero because he doesn't like that word, but we call him a neighbor. And last night he showed us what that really means. The town did not clap. They did not cheer. They stepped closer. One by one, people reached out. A hand on his shoulder, a light touch on his arm, a quiet "thank you" whispered near his ear. He did not know how to respond to so many small moments of kindness. He simply stood there and let them happen. Breath.
That afternoon he walked back toward his cabin. The path had been cleared in places and the snow was packed down by many boots.
The town felt different now, not because the buildings had changed, but because the people had. As he passed the small cafe, the owner waved him inside. Sit, the owner said. Eat something warm. He did. At the store, someone paid for his supplies before he could reach the counter. Consider it a favor returned, they said. He thanked them, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and unease. He had not gone into the storm for any of this. Breaths. He had gone because he could not stay behind. When he reached his cabin, he opened the door and stepped inside. The space felt quiet and familiar. The fire had burned down to ash. The air was cold. He set his bag down and took off his coat. He hung it back on the same nail by the door. He sat in the same chair by the fire and looked around the room. Everything was as it had been before, but he was not. He placed the drawing from the children on the small table. The mountain, the bus, the small figure with the light. He leaned back and closed his eyes. That night he dreamed of the mountain, but not in snow. He dreamed of it in summer. The trail was green. The river shined in the sun.
Birds moved through the trees. He was walking, not riding, and his legs still moved slowly.
But he did not feel heavy. He did not feel broken. Days passed. The storm became a story told at the cafe, at the store, at the hall. People spoke of the night the wind howled and the snow rose like walls. They spoke of the missing bus and the long wait for news.
And they spoke of the man who walked into the storm, but the man himself returned to simple things.
He fixed his fence. He fed his horse. He cleared snow from his path. Life went on, quiet and steady. Yet something had changed. People began to stop by his cabin, not because they needed help, but because they wanted to talk. They brought warm food, old stories, small laughs, rations. The children waved when they saw him in town. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, he stood outside his cabin and looked toward the mountain. The sky was painted in soft orange and pink. The trail he had walked in the storm was now just a thin, dark line in the distance. He knew he would never be the man he had been before his leg was hurt. He would never ride the same way. He would never move as fast or as easily. But he also knew something else now.
He did not need to be the man he used to be to matter. He only needed to be the man who showed up when it counted.
The wind moved gently through the pine trees, not as a threat, but as a quiet song. The man turned back toward his cabin, toward the small warm light inside, and walked home.